All right, hello everyone. Welcome Quincy, welcome Light. Good to see you. Welcome Calsopod. Good to see you again as well. Jack, welcome back. Jack says you give me so much inspiration. Thank you. I'm glad I could do that, and also I'm glad to hear that because inspiration is something that I have been trying to get over the past couple of weeks, just trying to figure out, what can I be doing with the game to really push it over the top, and still thinking about it, but figure I'd do a live stream, get your ideas, make another video. Got a big announcement, which if you're already an internet sleuth, you may have found already. It's not a super big secret, but we'll be making a big announcement on the YouTube channel shortly. So yeah, this is gonna be fun. And of course, I just realized that I started the stream without getting my water. So give me 10 seconds and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Wasn't even 10 seconds. I'm like the Flash. Okay, so here is the board, and let's take a look at the content items that we've written down and figure out what we want to work on. So, let me know what you think looking at this board. But, so, there's a number of things we could do tonight. We could make a new type of gun. We could make a new type of enemy. We could do another random encounter, perhaps, or we could do a couple of either gun affixes or player passives. And then to refresh, that's a lot of ideas. Well, it's not all ideas. Some of this is just tasks that need to be done. Like, there's a couple bugs in here and bunch of UI work that needs to be done, but if you see anything with like a list of checkboxes, those are ideas, and then these left 2 columns or left 3 columns over here are ideas here. So it's kind of a mixed bag. This is Obsidian MD with the Obsidian Kanban plugin. Really good note-taking app. You can write all of your notes in Markdown. And the thing that I like about it the most is that it saves all of your notes to your hard drive, which you can then back up as necessary. I really got into like backup, keeping a lot of my own data lately. So I've got a network attached storage that's syncing off my desktop, and then that's backed up to the cloud every evening. So I'm just obsessed with owning my data lately. I just woke up one day and realized I've got like a terabyte of data that's just like held by third parties, and if they just decide to like delete my account, then I will lose all of it. So anyway, so any ideas on what we should work on? I'm kind of feeling that maybe we should do some player passives or gun affixes. So to recap, gun affixes are basically passives that go on gun parts. So each of your 2 guns that you have is composed out of 3 gun parts. Each of those parts can have their own passives, which are called affixes. And then the player can have his own passives as well. And those sort of work in tandem to create, hopefully, what is going to be a lot of interesting combos. So I think this one is really interesting. Bleeding enemies spawn a blood golem on death. That is one that I think would be super interesting to work on. So bleed is a status that I have that increases the amount of damage that entities take per bleed stack. And this would be a player passive that causes golems to spawn whenever a bleeding enemy dies. And this would be like an AI-friendly AI thing that would go and attack other enemies, or perhaps they could be like little bombers. So they spawn, they run to the nearest group of enemies and then explode and deal damage. Something like that. Haven't seen the process of making one before. I can do that. Yeah, let's do player passive. All right, let's do the blood golem. This one sounds like it would be really fun. And that's probably going to take a good chunk of time, so we'll just focus on this. Cool. All right, then. Let's go ahead and make this. So first of all, let me go over a couple things that I've done. So in an effort to streamline the content creation process, I've actually replaced... So previously I was doing like really well, not really complex, but I was doing semi-complex cutout animations with the humanoid enemies, where the feet were different parts that were animated procedurally, and then the head and the torso would be animated procedurally. What I did is I just made it one static sprite. So if I go to my player here, so the torso now, let me just get rid of all this stuff. So the torso now is just one piece, right? So this whole block, so if I get rid of the hands, this whole block is just one sprite right here. And I'm actually happy with that because it reduces the amount of work that I need to do to produce new content. And since the characters are relatively small on the screen anyway, it's really easy to get away with just doing a simple animation like this. So just got a simple animation going like this. It looks kind of goofy in the editor, but when I run the game, it's just like, you're not looking at the character anyway. There's a lot of bullets flying around. So just the general impression of motion like works fine. And I made him look like he's hobbling a little bit since he's an older gentleman. So, and then the rats do that too. And so I kind of feel like I can get away with a lot by just using Animation Player and static sprites, and it's really easy for me to throw that together very quickly, which is going to allow me to make more content. So, hello Sag, welcome back to the stream. What am I working on? We are going to be doing a player passive where blood golems will spawn whenever bleeding enemies die. It's going to be super cool. I can't wait to get into it. But yeah, so I'm just kind of like, what are the things that I do? Oh, well, this whole done column is everything that I need to cover. This is done. Everything in here, I think, is something I can cover that I need to cover in a devlog. Everything in the done column. All right, let's get started on this blood golem. So should we start with the art or should we start with let's start with the code. So now I have to refresh myself on how I actually make a player passive. So there's a couple components. There's the player passive, which is the actual node that gets added to the player. And that is in scenes component passive right here. But then there's the passive definition, which is just an object. So in here, it's just a class that contains some basic data. So I think the first thing I want to do is let's just copy one of these. It'll just be easy to copy. Rename, we're going to call it blood golem passive definition. Perfect. And rename this definition. Okay, and it is unique, and we're gonna give it a title. We're gonna call this one Blood Babies, because that's the first thing that came to my mind, and I think it's quite funny. Summons a blood golem is summoned when a bleeding enemy dies. So there's our title and description. Those are the things that are used in the passive card for the UI. And that's basically it for the definition. Now, you may be asking, what's the definition for? The definition is just so that I have some data about a player passive without needing to instantiate a node, right? Because the node is a more complex object that has all of the logic for actually working in the game. But when I'm like just wanting to display passives like on the passive selection screen, I don't need to instantiate a node for that. So this is why they're separate. There's like a data class and then there's the functional node. And one thing that I need to do is I need to add this to my passive table. So I've got this loot table here. I should probably find a way to automate this. But the reason I'm manually adding all of these here is because I can control the weights of each one individually. So if there's a really powerful passive, I'll be able to turn down the weight on it so that it's less common compared to the others. But it's very annoying because if I forget to add the passive to this table, then it will never show up in the game. So it's something that I need to remember to do. Cool. All right, so let's look at our passives. So passives are just nodes that extend from the player passive class, and then I can add whatever additional nodes that I want underneath it. So we're going to create a new scene under here. I'm going to call it a blood golem. Blood G golem? No, blood golem. Boom. Then we're going to go ahead and add the script. This extends player passive. Okay. So, what's going to happen? Well, what we need to do is we probably need to... I have a global event manager called game events. And this is a very common pattern I'm realizing that a lot of people use. So, one of the problems with Godot is that you can have difficulty sometimes getting signals to the nodes that need to receive them. So if you've got a really complicated scene tree and you've got something like 50 layers down that needs to know whenever an enemy dies, it can be really hard to like connect those two events together. And so what's very common is that you can create an auto load node. So in my case, it's called game events right here. And in the auto load node, you can just have a couple of global events. So in here, for instance, entity collision game event, bullet last entity hit, all that kind of good stuff. And actually, I'm noticing that I don't have an enemy died event here. And so I'm probably going to want to do that. And I think we will do that. Base game event, gun stats, scene tree. So I did make it so that all of these global events inherit from the same base event. And I think that's going to be okay. Is it going to be okay? That's a good question. So signal name dot died. So we're emitting died, so we're going to need to figure out how to listen for enemy deaths, I think. And now the question is, where's the most appropriate place to put that? So the way that enemies are spawned is there's an entity spawner. And this entity spawner is sort of responsible for, number one, spawning the entity, spawning the enemy slash entity, and connecting the health component to whatever needs to be connected to the health component, if that makes sense. So it'll emit this entity spawned event handler. So emitting signal entity spawned. This will be listened to in several places, but the arena enemy manager is the most important one. And in here, you can say that it's connecting to on entity spawned here, and then in here, it's grabbing the health component and then doing all the connections and stuff. And this is because the Arena Enemy Manager needs to listen for when enemies have died so it knows when the wave is over. But I don't have a global way of listening to an entity dying. And I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to do that. I could emit a global signal from the health component itself saying, hey, this entity has died. However, there's a couple of problems with that. One, we're going to have allied entities that can die, and we probably don't want that to be the case. Well, do we want a global event for every entity dying? Probably, but we need a way of distinguishing between whether that entity is an enemy or not. So I've been like kind of avoiding this for a while, but I might need to come up with like I just need a way of identifying enemies as allies or enemies. I think there's like a faction in here somewhere. Yeah, so I have the player, ally, and enemy factions here, which I could probably rip out of the gun stats and put it into a more generic component. It's one more thing that I have to remember to do though when I'm doing an entity is to add the faction to it. So the question that I'm now going through is there an easy way to attach a faction maybe to an existing component? So here's my rat enemy. Actually, let's look at the skeleton. I like the skeleton more. Yeah, so in here, is there any component we can add like a faction flag to? Is there anywhere we can do that? The health component is probably the most sensible one, but again, I'm not sure if I should. I'm probably just going to create a new faction component. It's one extra thing to do, but this is probably the most best way to do it. So I'm going to create a new faction component in here. Oh boy, I can already see this causing a bunch of bugs because I'll forget to add it. But this is one of the things, if you're not going to use inheritance, then you are going to have to duplicate a lot of the scene structure. And that's probably... We'll see how it works. We'll see how it works. Okay. Export. Public. And now what are we going to do with the faction? So we want to take the faction out of here. And we'll probably just go ahead and slap that somewhere else. I want to slap it in the data in here. I'll just create a new folder called enum. Is that okay? It wants me to declare explicit values there. Okay, well, if you want me to. I don't know what it's recommending. Okay. So we'll give it a private setter. We'll import that there. Gun stats. Import that there. Cool. Now, I don't think I really need... Do I need an ally? So, the confusing part is I have a player and I have an ally. It makes sense to distinguish between them in terms of logic, but it doesn't make sense to distinguish between them in terms of faction. I don't know. We'll just leave it as is. It's not important yet. And then what I'm going to do, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say this.add to group. And this add to group is just an extension method that adds this node to a group called whatever the class name is. So this faction component will be added to the faction component group. And that way I'll be able to easily retrieve all of the entities that belong to a faction that are in the scene. So with that out of the way, now we need to add that faction component to the relevant places. And this is actually going to be super easy because now what I can do is I can add that global entity died signal. And that can be used to run the blood golem code. So let's just go to my entities here. I think this should be relatively easy. I'm going to build this really quick. Failed to build project solution. Okay, and then where else was it broken? In here? There we go. Faction. The new editor versions came out. Are you talking about beta 12? Come on, Omnisharp, why are you being so slow? I am on beta 12 right now, unless there was another release that I missed. No, looks like a beta 12. So yeah, I am on that, so that's good. Okay, now let's build. Cool. It crashed. So what we'll do is we'll just go through all these entities basically, and we're going to instance the faction component and just put that at the top. And this faction is going to, I'm actually going to change this. I'm going to default it to faction.enemy simply because that's going to be the majority of the entities in the game. Perfect. Okay. So now I can just Control C, paste this. Is there a way to paste, like, at a certain point? That would be nice. Phantom Gun is going to be a member of the player faction. Or the ally faction, rather. Player. I don't think this is necessary, but I'll just throw it on there. Just to be consistent. Yep, that's an enemy. Rat King. The Rat King is going to get reworked, I've decided. I'm not going to put the Shopkeep in a faction because he's not actually a targetable entity, so it doesn't make sense for him to have a faction. Okay. Skull. I've actually got quite a few enemies already. I didn't realize I had so many. But more to come still. Okay. So now we have to make the difficult decision of how do we have a global signal for an entity died? Should we just emit it from the health component? The problem is that health components can exist on things that aren't entities, in theory. So I could put a health component on, for instance, like a crate, and say this crate has 1 health. And it would make sense to have like the entity died signal there. So the entity spawner. Well, I can't put it in here either because if I want the entity died signal to fire from the blood golems as well, I don't think they're going to be spawned by entity spawners. So I'm probably just going to have to add it to the health component just for ease of use. Yeah, I think so. Unless, I mean, I could put that on the faction component instead. Wonder if I could do that. Hey, TC Sketches, how long have you been a game dev? Well, I've been doing game development for, I don't know, since I was a young teenager, around 14 years old. I'm 28 now, so I've been doing it on and off for 14 years. I wouldn't say that I'm like, that I was doing it rigorously for 14 years, but I was like sort of always doing something kind of for that period of time. And I wouldn't really call myself a game dev either, at least not until I've made a very commercially successful game. But yeah. Cool. I think, you know what, this probably will be bad, but maybe I'll just add that entity died in here in the faction component. It's between the faction component and the health component. And the reason why I'm just like toiling over this decision is because this is the kind of thing that can just like turn your code into spaghetti. Like I'm at a spaghetti fork in the road. I could add it to here and then that's just going to set me on a path to bloating up the health component. So maybe I'll just bloat up this brand new component instead. Probably makes more sense. So and actually, you know what I'm going to do? Export private health component. There we go. So we'll connect to health component, signal name dot died, callable dot from on died, and I'm going to do the null operator, whatever that's called, null chaining, just in case the health component is null. Now let's go to our game events here. Delegate void, entity died, event handler, node 2D. Do I want to do a node 2D? See, this is going to be, you know what? Entity died collision event. For the sake of consistency, I will just go ahead and do this. Even though I think my gun stats is going to be null. Professionals, let's see. Professionals that make games all their lives don't always make something commercially successful. That's true. That's true. I tried Smack Demon and loved it. Thank you. Played it through like 5 times, so I'd say you're doing all right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, if anyone's interested, firebelly.itch.io. I have a bunch of really small game jam games on there if you want to just check them out. I think I'm heading in the right direction, but I have not yet made a game that I would consider to be commercially successful yet, but here's hoping that changes relatively soon. If I pay the bills making a game, or at least some of the bills, then you're a professional. I have paid a handful of bills from making games. Most of my bills get paid by my software engineer full-time job. But yeah, I do understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think, you know, being able to make even $1 on a game that you've made it's a significant achievement. It really is, compared to like the population of people, both normal, just everyday people and also the population of people doing game dev. A lot of people do game dev and then, you know, they only make small games because it's a hobby. What does the null operator do? So in here, basically if the health component is null, it will not go on to call this function. So this existed in JavaScript for a long time. Basically it's just a way of like, instead of doing if health component is not null, then I can call connect, right? I don't have to do that with the null chaining operator. I can just say, do it. Is this game going to be commercial? Yes. Yes, releasing a game is very hard. I agree. Yeah, you're welcome, Jack. All right. So in my game events, so what was I doing? Oh, right. I was creating a new entity died event. Here's what I'm going to do. This is going to be very sloppy, I think. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shadow the, because there's not going to be a gun stats associated with this event. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say public. This is probably really bad, but public new. I'm just going to do this. How do I do the, let's see, get. We're going to return null. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to say logger. I don't think my logging class works anymore either. That's a pain. But we're going to do this. Logger.warn dot error, I guess. Cannot access gun stats in entity died event. Just so that I know that that's not going to work. Okay. So this entity died event. And we have our node2d entity. We'll get rid of that. Okay. So we've got our entity died event. So now what we can do is I can do this. Public static void emit entity died event. Event, thank you. And then instance dot emit signal name dot entity died event. Perfect. So that's our new global event. Kind of new on game development, and I use gdevelop. Do you recommend me continue with gdevelop or using code engine? Well, I think programming in general is a very useful skill to have. And it seems to me like it's typically much more, what's the word? Much more versatile if you know how to code. You can do a lot more, a lot easier. But there is a learning curve, right? So yeah, I think Peter's right. It depends on your goals. If you're comfortable with gdevelop and you're having fun with it and you're making games, then you know, I wouldn't say you should do anything, but I think if you're feeling limited by gdevelop, or if you're seeing other people making the kind of games you want to make and they're using different engines to do it, and you have a hard time seeing how you can do the same thing in gdevelop, then yeah, maybe consider switching to something like Godot or Unity or something like that. But if gdevelop is working for you and you're having fun with it, I don't really think there's a reason to switch. But I don't know what kind of position you're in, so that's just my 2 cents. Did you make a node attribute for C#? I did. So, let me just pull it up. Let's see. Yeah, so I have this repository called Godot Utilities, which you guys can go and use if you want. It's MIT licensed, so. And yeah, there's a node attribute here. Basically what it does is it uses reflection to automatically assign the node. So when I call this.wire nodes, anything with the node attribute, I guess I don't have one here. Anything with the node attribute here will automatically be assigned to. So it'll find the node with the same name as the member and then assign it. I think it's a lot nicer. Honestly, there should be something like that built into Godot C# automatically, but okay, so I'm going to emit this entity died event. We're going to emit the owner, and if the owner is null, we'll just emit this then.